Welcome again, everybody, to the Do It in Durham. It's our 10th year, Do It in Durham. I just want to give a shout out to our sponsors, premier sponsors. We've got City of Oshawa, we've got Invest Durham, Ajax Advantage, BACD. Partner sponsors, we have Whitby, that's the town of Whitby, the Federal Development Agency for Southern Ontario, KX96 FM. It was great to see Pam and Kelly last night at the Whitby Chamber of Commerce event. The community sponsors, Ontario Tech University, Brilliant Catalyst, City of Pickering, and the Spark Center, which is our RIC Center here in Durham region. If you're a technology-based business, do check them out. Feel free to share your experiences and to help raise awareness and visibility that you are open for business and that Durham region is the place to be. Whether you are thinking to start a business, grow a business, hire a person for a business, or invest in a business, think Durham region. So look out, I'll put some of those hashtags in the chat box to make it easy for you to share out. My name is Patrice Espa. I'm a business advisor and program coordinator at the BACD. I'll be facilitating this session and monitoring the chat box. So if you have a question for Shaun, feel free to put it in the chat box. Shaun will see them as well, but if I see something that needs outstanding, I can wave him down or something and interrupt. Also, if you want to, we will be uploading these videos to our YouTube channel. Yes, BACD has a YouTube channel. If you're not already subscribed, I'll also put the link in the chat box. Click on it, subscribe for it, and you'll receive notification when we upload these videos. Networking the chat, but only now, so we don't interrupt the speaker. I encourage you to turn your cameras on to have a more engaging experience. But if we are experiencing internet instability, the camera coming off usually helps with that. All right, enough small talk. Woo-hoo! Who is ready for day 4 of Do It in Durham? I know I am. I am delighted to now hand this session over to Shaun, who will be presenting Storytelling 101. Take it away, Shaun.
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Patrice. Patrice had me here. We probably met when I was starting this business originally, as we were talking about before we started. And she had me speak at Do It in Durham 2020, right during the thick of the pandemic. And I thought that, it was probably one of my earliest speaking gigs. Thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever done. Here I am 2 years later. It's still probably one of the coolest things I've ever done. But the presentation has changed a little bit. The world has changed a little bit. Stories still a lot of the same, although ever changing. So let's dive into that. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about my story, and I'm going to tell you why I'm telling my story. It's not just an act of vanity, I promise. We're going to talk about why we tell stories, especially, in our lives and then in our business. We're going to talk about how stories are important. Plus, we're going to talk about some examples that are specific to a couple industries. I can't obviously hit on everybody. My business is, I say, industry agnostic, so I touch on a little bit of everything. We're going to touch on some of the, the common ones that sort of come out to events such as these, and then we can talk about some more specific pieces afterwards or on a separate call. And then we're going to talk about some tips on how to tell stories as well. I know Patrice is monitoring the chat, as she said, for questions. That's great. If there's something really pressing, I'm happy to kind of jump out. Otherwise, I would say let's probably hold off on questions till the end if we can. I'm happy to stick around. I promise not to keep you the full hour. That's always my guarantee. I'll talk fast if I have to, but your time is valuable and I appreciate that. So feel free to stick around for questions, or I'll have my contact info up at the end, so we can always book time separately. So what's my story? I really should frame this as how, when I say my first career was in journalism. Journalism to me was all that I ever wanted. I was the editor of the elementary school paper. I have actually an old reporter's notebook behind me on this crazy bookshelf that, is from probably the early 90s of my scrawled handwriting. I remember interviewing the head of the Parents Association, grilling her on funding for the school. It was a weird kid. I was the editor of the high school newspaper. I got into a journalism program after high school, actually got sick. I had to leave, and then I went back into it for grad school, which was the greatest thing that I've done. I had an internship with CBC. I was producing Metro Morning and Here and Now and doing some work on national radio, and I had the absolute time of my life. It was literally my dream job. So, what happened, you'd ask after that? Well, I hit a wall. I spent months searching and there were no jobs, just nothing. by the end applying to Indigo and Starbucks, and I would have been happy to work at either one, but nothing remotely in my field. And I wound up actually personally falling in with an international recruiting firm while I figured out, my next adventure. And then I went to law school. And I know I have some legal friends and clients and a classmate, I think, on this call, so I got to be careful of what I say. But I can give you sort of my version of things. For me, law was always the plan B. And people, laugh, and I say that because so many kids, are 3 years old banging something as a toy gavel, and law is sort of their dream, and it's the plan A. No, for me, it was the plan B. My mother had gone to law school herself, and she stopped practicing when I was born. But I was always taught that law was a great start and a great training ground to learn how to do something else. The legal world, we'll talk about later, is all about storytelling. You're really paying someone to do a great job of telling your story. I loved law school. Personally, I actually had a great time, which I know is a weird thing for some people to hear. And I'm not going to say I went to class, but I had a great time. And I realized how quickly how much of law, was about storytelling. Law school teaches you to focus on these, really arcane and outdated legal principles. But as we'll, talk about, the reality of any legal case is a story behind it. How did it happen, and how did things get to that point? Whether it's, a big Supreme Court case or a small claims issue, doesn't matter. There's always a story there. So what happened to me after all that? To be honest, law wasn't great, and I'm putting that gently. I practiced employment law. I was working both with employers and employees. I loved helping people. I loved the one-on-one. I was really able to sort of help my clients on both sides of that equation tell their stories, and actually got some great results. I laugh in hindsight. I think I was a pretty good lawyer. But I hated it. I hated the fighting for its own sake. I hated how long everything took. I was talking with a friend yesterday who was in the middle of going through a wrongful termination suit. It's just feels never ending when you're in the thick of it. The stresses of practice completely got to me. And I'll be honest, I couldn't take it anymore. So I left. I wound up doing some contract legal review work while I figured out my next steps. And thankfully, it really all started to come together. I had done a bit of this work previously, actually, even before law school. I was doing some business content writing. And so I started this business up, 10 years after that, really, well, not quite 10, but close, on a lark, just sort of hanging my shingle and seeing, hey, maybe someone needs help, telling their story, and maybe I could help with that. I put out an open call to anyone who needed writing help. And suddenly I had my first client, and then a few more, and then a few more, and they started referring people, and it's really grown, and it's become, the Right Stuff agency that works with businesses of all shapes and sizes across all these industries, and writes all these different things. It really is a new adventure every day, because I get to help businesses of all sizes tell their stories better in a way that engages their key audience. I have been able to work with solopreneurs who are just starting, their first website, to some internationally known brands. And I'm really fortunate in that I get to do what I do, and that I get to help people in a way that I really enjoy. So I promised it wasn't vanity. Why the heck am I telling you all of this? Trust me, there's a method to my madness. I promise you. People need to know you, like you, and trust you. That's the name of the game. This is why I'm sharing my story. This is what's at the heart of building relationships. Know, like, and trust. So think about the relationship that we're building here right now. In order for you to trust anything that I'm going to say next for the next half hour or so, you need to know me, and you need to like me. So I've let you into my world a little bit, and you've gotten me warts and all, and all my pain points. And so I'd say you probably know me. And if I'm even being a little presumptuous here, hopefully you like me just a little bit, because I have taken the time to actually tell my story and to let you in. I thank you for letting me do that and for listening. We tell stories because they help us build relationships quickly. When you're doing any sorts of sales or business development in your business, you need to build connections fast. You only have a few minutes or sometimes only a few seconds. We talked about the elevator pitch. The elevator pitch is usually what they say, 30 seconds, a minute, to engage someone and to catch their attention. And believe me, it's even less time than you'd think. And time in that point moves much faster than you feel like it does. So that know, like, and trust have to work really quickly. Pardon me. That's why if you want someone to open up in a short conversation, get their story. Ask them questions about themselves that show that you're really interested. It's amazing how much you can get someone to open up when they know, like, and trust you. Business isn't B2B or B2C, it's human to human. And I read this a couple weeks ago and it really stuck with me. We still, in the business world, and I'm, on the peripheries of the business world, but we still think of the business world in these binary terms that it's, B2B or B2C, or I call myself B2B2C at a lot of points, but they're totally outdated. In my view, when you're talking to a business or an individual, no matter what, whether it's a customer or client, we're all human at the end of the day. With so many of us operating, either as solopreneurs or working on side hustles or working on sort of branding ourselves as a separate entity from our business, the lines blur so often anyway. So to be effective, you and your business both need that human touch, and storytelling is what can help you get there. Stories stick with us. It's some of our oldest tradition, that history of oral tradition of passing down stories from generation to generation. Think about just even stories within your own family and family lore from relatives that you never knew. It's a proud facet of indigenous traditions and cultures in this land, but as well as cultures around the world. I think probably most every culture has some, traditional element of storytelling and passing stories. We tell stories because they're natural to us. We connect with them. And believe it or not, we're actually pretty interested in each other. Even if, we like to play shy, we really do care and we want to learn more. Everybody's got a story. Some of us grew up learning that our stories don't matter, which couldn't be farther from the truth. I had a client last year. We met through a networking site and we were talking about her business. She runs a small company in the US that was an educational company with her and two other women. And we were talking about her work, just, casually shooting the breeze. And she told me they had hired a writer to do their website. And they paid this guy who had come recommended. And the first thing that he told them is that their stories don't matter. Yep, just your stories don't matter. No one wants to learn about you. No one cares about you. Just leave it at the door. I was crushed. I think I actually kind of slunk in my chair. I've never heard anything, that sad. These are three powerful, successful women in an industry that, is not always dominated by women at the top. Their stories are everything. They actually have a designation as a woman-owned business in the state because it is a special designation to have. I'm going to look for, what sets their business apart from their competitors. And she handed it to me on a silver platter. It's right there. It's their stories. Stories are what make us who we are. They're what make us unique. They set us apart. You'll hear me say that again. There's reason for it. Why do we tell stories in business? Because A, they resonate with us, and B, we know how to share them with others. We connect with stories even when it's someone that we don't know, or if it's, the apocryphal story of, a collection of facts that have come together. For a story to resonate, it really needs to be tangible. We have to be able to either see ourselves in the story as the protagonist, as a character. Successful stories resonate because somewhere in the back of our minds, we either go, that sounds like me, or that sounds like my brother, husband, sister, neighbor, friend, partner, hairdresser, etc., what have you. I've had this debate with folks when it comes to content writing, because there's those who believe that, everything you do has to be very high level, very niche, very focused in terms of content, that it's got to really sort of play to that exact audience. Personally, I disagree. Even if your subject matter is niche, the more accessible you're willing to make yourself, the better your work will be and the more people you can bring into your orbit. And this means letting people connect with the stories that you're telling. Not only, might it sound like the reader, but, if the story is simple enough, we can really relate to the person in the story. Stories set us apart. They're, how we stand out. And I learned this again last night. Do It in Durham has some great lessons if you go to the events. I was sitting there just chatting at the back of the room, I think probably about 2 feet from Patrice, with a mortgage broker. And we were chatting at the Whitby Chamber on tap. And, we're talking about her business. And I have a couple mortgage broker clients. We're going to talk about real estate in a bit. And I asked her, what sets her apart from her competitors. And she said it's her. She is who makes her business stand out. I couldn't have said it better myself. It feels silly to bark superlatives about, how your product is the biggest, your company is the best, you're number one, you're just, really beating your chest. That rings shallow with people today. I don't think it, works like it might have, back in the traveling medicine show days where, you're sort of barking from a wooden box. We're used to being oversold, and we're skeptical, and we're cautious. And so use stories instead as what sets us apart and what really gets people to kind of sit up and take notice of what we're doing and what we have to offer. We're surrounded with stories every day: TV, movies, songs. It's all storytelling. I often describe, when I'm writing for clients, that a good blog post is like a song. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. We watch TV and movies because we engage, with a plot and with characters. And sometimes, yeah, it's totally escapist and it's not, based in reality. But we watch a lot of reality television. We watch a lot of things that, or even whether it's a sitcom or what have you, close to real life, because those stories bring us in. How my wife watches such gruesome true crime content all day, I will never know. She could, watch a chalk outline for hours. It boggles my mind. But it's definitely the stories that she remembers, albeit with, alarming detail that scares me a little. But she really remembers those stories inside and out and can talk about them with her friends, and they know each story by a fact pattern because they're just so engrossed in, connecting with that narrative. We also see stories in politics and in sports. In sports, we cheer for the underdog. It's often, and athletes who have been through struggles, and for victors and people who have really sort of come up through, a hard time, because we remember those stories. Personally, I'm not a sports guy myself, but there is great storytelling even for us non-sports fans. I think of something like 30 for 30, which is a really brilliant documentary series, and I think it's now on Disney Plus, from Bill Simmons. If you want to catch up at home, it's sports stories for those who aren't sports people, and for those who are, and it's it really catered for a sports audience, but it goes so far beyond that, and it really focuses on telling those stories behind the stories in sports, the stories about the people more than just their final score. The Michael Jordan documentary also, I think did a lot of that and really kind of broke things down behind the scenes. We root for the underdog. We cheer for the person who worked hard, who did good things, who gave back, and who really put their passion to work that they do. Why? Because we love that story. So how do stories translate into sales? Well, think about founders and their stories. Steve Jobs started Apple working out of his garage. Richard Branson's memoir is fascinating. I don't know if anybody's read Losing My Virginity. I think he's written a couple of memoirs now, but it's a really interesting read. He's crazy. He puts, for all the money in the world that man has, he puts everything on the line each time he starts a new venture. It basically all goes as collateral. So, one false move, I'm sure he'd rebuild himself, but he'd be in real trouble. And it's an amazing level of commitment to see what he's done. Eric Yuan, who started Zoom, got his visa denied for the US 8 different times before making it to the States and starting, the company that we're using right now. Steve Jobs' backstory made Apple unique. Apple was unique for its product, but it was also really unique for this kooky co-founder who, wore the same uniform all the time, and spoken these weird syntax patterns, and seemed to sort of be an otherworldly figure. I think someone just paid $250,000 for his Crocs. His sandals went on sale on auction, and they still had sort of pardon me, the sweat imprints of his feet. And someone paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for that. So there's a lot there. These stories make their founders' businesses even more unique than the product that they're offering. It really kind of takes them to that next level. They don't exist in isolation, these stories. We all have them, and they provide lessons for others about strength, about resilience, about perseverance. The stories of these inspirational founders are so integral to the story of the company. We also remember product stories. They invoke a lot of feeling and emotion, and we need to be able to connect with those stories to see ourselves using a product. And I talked about growing up with this hyperbolic advertising. I joke about the Ron Popeil infomercials, but wait, there's more. Or just screaming about cutting prices. We've just been trained by 2022 to tune so much of that out. But what we connect with are stories. And yes, testimonials are great, and they're the lifeblood of a business, but you can even go beyond a testimonial and really talk about the stories of the people behind that testimonial. Kind of, I think of it somewhere between a testimonial and a full out case study. It doesn't have to be full out methodological. It doesn't have to be this 20-page document that no one's going to read, but you can actually tell that narrative. I'm about to do it with a client this afternoon, that narrative version of how you've helped someone with your product during a time that they were in need. Whether you're offering a product or a service, no matter what your business is, your story has to answer the question why. And you can tell my age because I say the phrase "pick up the phone and call." Yes, a lot of it's on email now or on social, but metaphorically speaking, bear with me for a little bit. Let me feel not so old. Why do we need to pick up the phone and call? Your story and your why are going to be what wins every time. If I had a nickel for everyone who told me at a party that they didn't have a story, I'd be retired. We wouldn't be having this conversation. It's amazing how often people will tell you, "Oh, I don't have a story," because truthfully, probably no one's ever asked them before. When I meet people now and they tell me some sort of tidbit about themselves, then they laugh and say, "Ah, but it's a long story." I respond with 3 simple words: "I've got time." And when you say that, even if you don't, make the time, because you never know what they're going to open up about in that conversation and what they're going to reveal to you. Everybody has a story. You, as a business owner, have a story, and your clients all have their own. Think about how to connect those two and how to make your story resonate with them and how to make their stories part of your own. So let's look at a couple industries here just to really give some meat behind everything. So when it comes to legal services, I want to offer, some tips for some specific industries that I've encountered a lot. There's, a lot of folks on this call, like I was saying. So I'm going to hit on about 4 or 5 industries, and then happy to take some questions afterwards or set up time to chat, privately. I work with a lot of lawyers still. I think there are a few on this call, which is great. Lawyers are excellent writers, and they're known for it. And I will say that with a straight face. They are truly, I make a lot of lawyer jokes. I'm terrible, but they are truly excellent writers. They are. Most of the success that a lawyer has before a judge is in their written advocacy. If they're presenting sort of, written material and then arguing in person in court, most of it's decided in the writing. The written persuasive work is phenomenal. Lawyers can write you a letter that'll give you goosebumps, or really make your hair stand on end if they want to. And sometimes that's part of the job. But the writing for marketing is very different. They really have to kind of shift their brains away from thinking about the client first and how the client's interpreting this information. And they need to remember why they're telling a story. Is it just for the sake of, putting out content because you feel like you need to do it because everybody else is? Or are you trying to engage new clients, re-engage past clients, etc.? What can someone gain from learning about a case or changing legislation? Do they really know how you can help them? When I work with a lot of lawyers, for example, I talk to them about case law. I don't know if anyone's ever sat and read a legal decision here. Most of them, at least today, are in plain language, which was a great movement from about 20, 30 years ago to make law more accessible. But they can still put you to sleep, especially if you don't quite know what you're reading. Lawyers are actually, can be really bad storytellers when it comes to this, because, surprise, surprise, and with all due respect to my colleagues, they can get a little lost in the details, especially when they're talking to, one another. I've seen lawyers who write blogs, about total legal nuances and really small, fine point details in cases, and I think their clients will be impressed. Spoiler alert, they're not. What they're missing is cases, as I mentioned earlier, tell a story. Legal cases tell a story, whether it's two individuals or an individual at a corporation, or even two corporations fighting each other. Aside from important changes to the law, the greater story is that someone put in that time, that money, and that sweat equity to get that far in that case. When you consider the fact that 99% of civil cases, lawsuits, settle before trial, I think it's about 99%. It usually wavers a little bit on the decimals. It means that someone believed enough in their convictions, to actually take something before a judge or before a court. That's a lot of what the story is. So if you're in a position to help someone similar to the people in that case, tell them that story. The reader should be able to not only understand what you're saying, what you're talking about, but that they can sit up and go, hey, that sounds like me. And maybe I should be calling so-and-so because they can help me through this. So that's where the connections start to happen with the storytelling. Real estate. Love real estate. Love working with agents and with brokers. Sure, to some extent, real estate sells itself. And, look, we've seen listings with great photos and listings with terrible photos and listings with great video and listings with, if you're looking at a listing for a house and they don't show you the inside of the house, well, you can use your imagination. Sometimes the pictures will tell you just about everything. But real estate is so much beyond that, because any agent that I speak to tells me that, the real estate game is really all about relationships. So what are you doing to stay connected and to stay imprinted with your clients in between those purchases and sales? What are you doing that sets you apart? I have a lot of real estate clients, and respectfully, a lot of them aren't doing much original marketing. They're subscribing to a service or such, but few of them actually are pushing themselves to stand out from the crowd. In a crowded marketplace with agents everywhere and advertising truly everywhere, why is someone choosing to work with you? What is it that you do differently that nobody else does? Tell your story, and tell it in a really fun, unique, and engaging way. And then tell the stories of the people that you've helped. If you've been in the game for a long time, you are an arsenal of stories. You have so many stories you've collected over the years. For any new client that comes your way, you've probably had a dozen similar clients before that you can relate back to them. Talk about how you've helped those people. Don't make it hard. Tell the stories of your superpower, whether it's, how your life before real estate helped you become a better agent. And I have that conversation with a lot of agents. They have background in this or that. Okay, well, how does it connect? And there's always something. Or whether, your superpower is your eyes and you see things in a property or in a mortgage deal that others miss, or your logic skills and you can, find ways to negotiate better rates by doing this and that. And, you've moved mountains for clients that, others have not been able to do. Storytelling is an opportunity to share really useful, helpful information. Once you have people who are engaged, don't hesitate to be a resource for them. You can stick around as not only that friendly face, but a really important, informative resource. And that's also what can make you special. Financial services, and I have clients in insurance and accounting and all over the map. some in the crypto space, which is a whole other animal that I'm, trying to sort of learn my way through. And that one specifically goes to that first point. Do your clients understand as much as you think that they do, or are they just too scared to admit that they don't understand? We don't admit when we are scared, don't understand something. I wrote an article, I think earlier this year, about being the shy kid in class. And if you've ever been the shy kid in class, or whether it's grade school or you're an adult in a presentation, and you don't know what's going on, are you the person who raises their hand and says, "Hey, I don't understand what you're saying to me"? Or do you quietly sort of sit back and smile and hide in the back corner and hope that it'll all be okay over soon? Because I definitely am the latter, and I think most people sort of fall with that latter category. So that little bit of education goes a long way. Anything in the financial services realm can be complicated, and you don't need to pretend that it's not. Our financial literacy collectively is atrocious. And the sad thing is that most of us are too proud, or, too ashamed to admit it. I can tell you personally, mine is still rocky. Thankfully, it's getting better. And, my wife is skilled, but I'm learning as I go. I say this, because obviously I'm being vulnerable with everybody here today already, but also, look, I'm a lawyer, I'm a professional, I went to grad school. People would assume that I have something like that figured out. Oh, he's a smart guy, he must know what he's doing. No, don't assume my education point, dictates where I'm coming from, or the training that I've had on this specific area. Without an education in a way that I could connect with, I didn't have it all figured out, not by a long shot. There's a lot of room for education there that you can, insert your storytelling into. If you're in any sort of advisory position, no matter what you're doing, and usually you're advising clients on some form or another and guiding them through a process, use stories to your benefit. Take that opportunity to sort of meet your clients, get to know them, get to know their stories, learn where they are at, and talk to them about how you can help others, and use stories, from past experiences that you can relate to. If you're in financial planning, talk about, what makes that client service superior. And benefits, how you can help save someone's behind. I hear those stories all the time from how you've saved people. The ultimate newsletter, and I have told the story in presentations before, so forgive me if you've heard it. I'll make it quick, but the best newsletter I think I've ever seen to date was a benefits provider that I knew through networking several years ago, and I hadn't seen her for a while, but I guess I was on her mailing list. And it actually went to my spam. I didn't catch it till I was sort of emptying my spam mailbox, but I saw her name in the address line, and I saw the subject line of "This couple made a huge mistake." And I went, "Okay, you know what, Aviva, I'm listening. I'll take that bait. I'm intrigued now. What are you talking about?" So I click open her email, and the first two lines in big bold letters are, "This couple made a huge mistake, and here's how I helped them." And I stood up and I applauded in front of my computer, because that to me is brilliant. Now, funny enough, her daughter wrote it. Her daughter and I were classmates at writing school. I only learned that one after the fact. So she is well trained, but truly keep it simple. If she started talking about really nuanced concepts in financial literacy, I would have driven right by, because I wouldn't have understood what she was saying. But "this couple made a huge mistake, and here's how I helped them." You're instantly sharing a story. You're instantly sharing a story that anyone can connect with. And you're instantly talking about how you can help navigate someone through that story. Brilliant. Home improvement. Don't leave clients guessing about when to call you. Use your stories to make those connections. I got a great piece of feedback from a client a couple weeks ago. We were sitting at Brock Street Espresso having coffee. Oh no, forgive me, jacked up. Forgive me. And we had already done a bit of work together. She knew me, she liked me, she trusted me, so I kind of had those three bases covered. But we were talking about sort of opportunities, and where we can get on. And she said a great statement. She said, "I don't know where to use you." And it was like a lightning bolt went off, because here's someone who knew my work and liked me, but hadn't really put it together of, "I don't know where you can actually help me." And so that was no comment on her. It is a full comment on me of, "Hey, I got to make sure that clients know where I can help." When you're in something like home improvement, home renovation, interior design, what have you, make sure clients understand. Don't leave anyone guessing as to where to use your services, especially not when it comes to something like a home improvement or construction. Never, and you're for those in this industry, you tell me this all the time. Never assume how much your audience or your client knows. Their lack of knowledge is usually why they're calling you in the first place. Whether they're willing to admit that they don't know, or whether they're too shy and tried it themselves and learned very quickly what they don't know. Make sure that you can tell your stories and make them really easy and accessible and relatable about how you can, either catch signs of trouble early, or how you can help save them money. There's so many themes to the stories of the work that you've done for past clients. If early intervention is key to solving a specific problem, talk about it. Talk about it from their perspective. If there are umpteen reasons to call a professional instead of, doing a DIY job, spell it out clear as day. And when you think you're being too clear, be even clearer than that. It may be lucrative cleaning up disasters, and that certainly can happen, in other careers as well, but there can be a lot more referrals if you're going to be a hero from the outset of the relationship. If you're in retail, and I don't do as much retail work, but I've certainly done some because product sales is a little bit different. Stories are what sets you and your product apart. Early on in the pandemic, I mentioned, I had done a presentation with Do It in Durham Week 2 years ago. It was called Your Virtual Storefront. And I actually laughed on Tuesday. I went to see a friend present on social media, and she mentioned, the virtual storefront concept. And I was like, oh, I chuckled because, obviously it's stuck around a little bit. It's about, how businesses were, my presentation at least, was how businesses were forced to close their doors, during the depths of the pandemic, and everyone had to up their online presence, their online game real quick. So today, whether you have, physical brick and mortar presence, you're online only, doesn't, or hybrid, you need to be able to stand out and let your stories be, the stories of your product and how you've helped people be what helps you to stand out. What's going to make someone choose your business, your product, your offering? It's about what stands out from the crowd. My wife and I watch a lot of Seinfeld every night. It's what, puts us to sleep. And those seasons where Elaine starts writing for the J. Peterman catalog. And I love them because the product descriptions are just next level. For this a weird fashion line that she's working for. All these, products have these wacky, far-fetched descriptions, and they're goofy, but they stick. You don't need to go that far. But you can definitely talk about, how you've helped people and appeal to the senses. You're talking about something being great quality is one thing, but what does it feel like? What does it smell like? What do you see? What does a certain scent evoke? What does something taste like? There's umpteen different ways to do it. Depends on, the work that you're doing, but have a little fun with it. Really, be able to engage others and talk about those stories. And the more that you bring it to life, the more you're going to be able to engage somebody with that. One last little note about community before we get into some of the tips. It sounds a little bit meta doing a plug for BACD and, for the region during my presentation, but I'm going to throw it in here, and there's a reason for it. Even if you have, thanks, Patrice. Even if you have an exclusively online business, connect within your physical community if you have the opportunity. At the event last night at the Whitby Chamber on Tap, I brought out a friend who had connected with me on LinkedIn. He also runs a digital business, and we are in similar spheres and hopefully do some work together. But he happens to live in Bowmanville, and we were actually supposed to meet for coffee the other week, but wound up getting waylaid. And so I said, "Hey, come out to this," and it was great. And he did, and he loved it because even if we're totally both digital presences, it's nice to have that in-person community when you can. Get out there and tell your story locally. I have a couple clients in the region. I don't have a ton. I have clients all over North America right now, but even still, I can walk into a room and they'll go, "Hey, there's the storyteller." People know who I am. They know the shtick. Attend local events, like these or some of the in-person meetups that have happened. Meet other business people, meet people in your network, meet people in other industries, and just keep sharing your story because it makes you more relatable and it forms those connections. You never know truly where your next client or your next referral is coming from. So even if it's not going to be local, it's still nice to have a place to hang your hat, be amongst a sense of community. So how do we tell our stories effectively? If we're going to do it all day, every day, and we do, how do we do it well? Let's look at a couple tips. As I take a sip of tea because my throat's a little dry. Number one, be relatable. The audience needs to see themselves or someone they know, in those shoes. We've talked about that a fair bit. We grow up hearing fairy tales, at an age where we can picture ourselves still as kings and queens and princesses and, animals in any other fantasy. Most of us leave that world behind as we get older. Whether we should or not is another story. But, most of us sort of leave the fantasy world behind. And we instead, find stories that we can connect with as we grow up and ones that we can relate to. Don't make assumptions about your reader. Don't assume that they have, a grad school education or millions of dollars to spare. That may be some folks, but it's not for everyone. That means for lawyers, remember that your readers probably didn't go to law school. Some, might have unlimited resources. Others might be too scared to pick up the phone and call you. And so, you can sort of welcome them in a way that really disarms them. For those in real estate, when you're using something like a key term or a complicated situation, you might have people reading your stuff who have bought and sold countless properties and are really in the game, and others who are maybe just contemplating their first. So, find those stories that are relatable. If it sounds like us or someone that we're close to, we sort of inherently pay more attention. Be authentic. People want to support you and they want to connect with you. One of the hardest parts of storytelling for so many people is letting their guard down, even just a little bit. They're taught that it's best to be private, not to show emotion, not to let people in. That's really a dated approach, in my view. The pandemic has helped kind of break that down as we all, zoomed into each other's homes out of nowhere, in each other's bedrooms, what have you. I had a friend who was a criminal lawyer who had a very small apartment, and he was known as the lawyer with the messy bedroom because he was doing criminal hearings on Zoom and he had nowhere else to do them. So it goes. I don't advocate a messy bedroom, make your bed, but don't hide that authenticity. Show it off with pride. It actually came up in a question in a session the other day about, how much of your branding should be you. And that was more in the social media context. And there's no magic formula to it, but don't hide behind everything and pretend, that you don't exist, because you're not a robot. You're a business owner and you have a story. Have a point. There's a line from Planes, Trains, Automobiles. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener. But stay focused. Wandering and rambling, as you can tell, I do a fair bit of. Don't usually do you a lot of favors in storytelling. Stories take a reader or a listener on a journey, so don't get them lost along the way. You can include details, but try to stay kind of focused and on track. If you divert too much or you go in all directions, you are going to risk losing your audience. It's often also why shorter is better, especially in writing. Don't go too short and confuse anybody, but don't dally with your words just because you're putting them there for their own sake. It cracks me up now when I see the estimated reading time of any article or a link on LinkedIn. I can tell you personally, and at least for me, that if it'll take significantly longer than I have time to spare, I'm either probably not reading it now, I may or may not come back to it, or if I have to see it, I'm going to skim it very quickly. And so, I'm not going to be reading every word. I'm going to be doing a really quick glance, and I'm going to have to get what you want me to get from it in that limited period of time. So remember that your audience doesn't have all day. Don't shy away from emotions. It's all about, that authenticity we mentioned. This is beyond authenticity. Inject a little personality into it. Be honest about emotions. If you want to, keep things light, be funny. If it's appealing to, emotion, make it tangible. It doesn't have to be too dark, but enough for people to connect. Some stories are going to be funny. Some are adventurous. Some are sad. Whatever the story is, don't shy away from the emotional component involved. The goal is to be relatable, and people have emotions, even if we like to pretend that we don't. You don't need to be breaking the fourth wall every time. Everyone shudders at the thought of the overshare. But I think letting your audience in at those right times can really help you form those deeper connections. And lastly, have a call to action. That's the whole point of telling stories. A story shouldn't just sit and linger and your people are guessing at the next steps. It needs to make people sit up and know what to do. You're not just telling them for their own sake. Telling them, for business is illustrative of how you can help, your product or service can help. But by the end of you telling that story, somebody should be ready to call or email you right away. Don't take that for granted. Sometimes the brain needs that extra. I'm actually writing a piece now for a client on nudging. Sometimes the brain needs that extra nudge. It needs that extra reminder. So never assume there's an implied call to action and people are going to automatically figure out the next steps or they'll know what to do next. Social media is a great example of this. Tap like, tap to save, tap to this and that, because we need that, click of, hey, okay, here's what I do next. Even in your storytelling, it needs to be there. If you have any questions, you can reach me. Here's my call to action. If you have any questions, you can reach me at any time. There's my email, Shaun@therightstuff.agency. My website is www.therightstuff.agency. You can do a .anything these days. It surprises people always. And I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok for some bizarre reason. Anything you need to find me is, I got off Twitter. Twitter and I are no longer friends. But anything else is at The Right Stuff Agency. So feel free to find me anytime. LinkedIn, let's connect, reach out. Would love to have a chat. Thank you so much to all the sponsors of Do It in Durham Week. This is an incredible week. It really does such great work for the region. We learn so much from each other. Last night was and Patricia Play was an amazing event. People were so excited to be in that room. They're excited to go to other sessions. Thanks, Patrice, for the shout out last night. I appreciate it. They're excited to go to different sessions. They're excited to go to Java Joel tomorrow, which, I'm not co-hosting tomorrow, but I co-host once in a while with the Whitby Chamber. They're excited to go to, the next networking opportunities. There's so much to see and do in this region, in this business community. So take advantage of it. Wonderful. I will stick around for a couple questions. So
Thank you so much, Shaun. I'm not seeing any questions, but yes, it definitely open to it. I'm getting, okay, Tracy Turbofield has raised her hand. Yeah, go ahead, Tracy.
Hey, Tracy.
Hi, Shaun. I don't have a question, but I want to make a comment about Shaun, because remembering people and what they've said is really important. And I showed up at the Do It in Durham launch the other night, and I hadn't seen Shaun. I don't think I'd ever met you in person, actually. I think it was
couple jolts, but it's been a while.
Was it? Okay. So it's been a while.
Pre-pandemic.
Yeah, it's hard to tell now who you've actually met in the physical form and who you've met on a little Zoom screen, right? Anybody else relate? So I walk up to Shaun and he's like, hi, Tracy, how's your daughter? I remember your daughter, blah, 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 blah. This was like from 2 years, maybe even 3 years ago. And I was like, you remember that? Like, did I tell you that? It was so fascinating to me that Shaun remembered something that I had told him, probably on an event or shared or something like that. But I was really wowed by that and thinking like, okay, this guy like has a really good memory. And now and that's actually kind of what prompted me to come on here today with all the choices of things to do, because you made that personal connection with me again. And I'm like, yeah, I got to go hear what this guy has to say. So thank you, Shaun.
Thanks, Tracy. No, it was look, you never know who Amanda, I'll grab you just a second. You never know who's watching your stuff. So I hadn't seen Tracy, since the pandemic started, but she had this meteoric rise in her business with virtual travel that I watched on the sidelines and cheered through Facebook. And she got news coverage and I watched that. And it was really exciting. So, you don't know how you connect with people. The important thing is to keep connecting.
Yes.
My friend Amanda has a question and doesn't know how to unmute herself, so I'm going to help her out as I ask her to unmute. There we go.
I can unmute. I couldn't figure out how to do the little hand raise thing.
Yeah, all good. Hey, buddy.
And that's why it's so important as a small business owner to work with the professionals, right? Like the tech, the writers, all the rest. And Shaun has been great in that regard. And a comment and a question. Certainly, I know in my own style of writing, I have biases from my training. But even if you're more inclined to creative writing, I think you're going to have a mindset of this is what I want to write about, and maybe not see the forest through the trees. So that's why I found it really helpful to work with writers and other professionals. And in that context, Shaun, just thinking like as more content is generated and the business grows and maybe I want to, try my hand at writing again. Do you find it more difficult to work with, say, I give you a blog and you can help me improve it, or do you prefer to just work with and strategize with the business professional and then do your own thing and present it to them? Like, can both ways work? Does one way work better than the other?
So it's a good question. I've done, and Amanda and I have done some great work together, if you don't mind me saying so. I've done both. I have often I will offer occasionally editing services if a client is on a real tight budget, and so they or want to take their own stab at drafting first, but just kind of want a second set of eyes. I'm happy to kind of do that. It's not usually what I do first. I had a client. The horror story is a client came to me and said, I have no money. I will take a first stab, and if you want to edit, okay, okay, I'll give it a shot. This is early on, and she sent me her stuff, and it was just all copied and pasted from other websites. There was nothing original there. It was literally copied and pasted from other websites. I said, I'm not helping you rip off material. This has to be done. If you want any traffic at all or any SEO traction, it has to be done fresh. So, there's reasons to do that. When I am talking with a client, I kind of have to see that narrative in my head. I have to kind of see that story of, okay, so I have to put myself in the shoes of who's going to read this, who needs this information, and go, okay, here's what they might need to know. Here's where they might be coming from. Here's how to break things down, which is why, as Amanda can tell you, I use a lot of images. I use a lot of, very colloquial speech, figures of speech, references, etc. Not things that you might find in a scholarly article, and certainly not things that Amanda and I would have read in law school. But there are ways that people can kind of connect with that material. So that's how I approach it fresh. If someone is going to come to me with something that's already been drafted, yeah, I can try to work some of that in and try to help them, note where to break things down. The challenge that I find sometimes if someone, has something already built up and says, hey, what do you think of this? Is even if they tell you they're not married to what they've written, they can be a little married to what they've written. It can be a little, it is sort of a personal extension of them. People take their writing very protective place. And I get that. I don't. I took my ego out of this a long time ago, which is, why I'm able to do this business. But, it's up to you at the end of the day. If it's really what you want to do, then yeah, we can work with it. It's not always the best result, not always most accessible. So I hope that helps answer things a little bit. Shelby, I'm just reading, there's times in some story I can undermine what they're doing, but Shelby, that's a great question. And talking about sort of, can someone's story, in their past prior work undermine themselves? I was talking about this actually yesterday with someone from the Whitby Chamber. We had coffee before the event. And I said, look, the funny thing with something like my background is I can make myself as big or as small as I want to be. And I think anyone can do that. If I am in a room full of lawyers, and I'm actually going to be tonight, I am going to put a suit on, and I'm going to, put on, my best foot forward. I'm going to be super professional, and I'm going to wear that hat. That's not me. If you couldn't tell, it's really not my personality. It's not my nature. I don't know if that ever was, but it really isn't anymore. So if I'm going to talk to someone who, is on a factory floor, and I used to talk to a lot of folks on factory floors about, doing work about a factory. Yeah, that, puffing my chest out is not going to impress anybody. So I think, there is, no matter what you do, whether you're in the professional, white collar, blue collar, what have you, we don't use those terms anymore. The more relatable you can be broadly, helps. And I think the more unique that it makes you help. So don't shy away from where you've come from, where you're headed, what you want to do. I think it's all part of it. That helps. I've got a couple more minutes. Anyone else?
I think the storytelling is so important, right? Like I've changed careers even in my own profession, going from very corporate and suit wearing, like Shaun said, to being more authentic to myself. And that's where, I worked with the storytellers like Shaun to help me convey, my story, because I think that's what makes you relatable. And the suits are for the other lawyers, right, Shaun? They're not really for the customers or the clients. So
Depends in some clients, but that, Amanda, your
yeah,
story is
of course.
perfect because you have done that full pivot of, talking about big and small. Is you were working for these massive companies, and Matt has a background in the pharmaceutical industry, so working with these huge players and these busy boardrooms of high level executives, and now you're the local lawyer next door helping people write their wills and their marriage contracts, and that's a complete pivot to being as small as you need to be able to connect with that audience, and being as relatable and as accessible. Total pivot and approach. Same person, but just how you frame your story.
Just have a quick question, the 60 seconds we have left. Do you provide a structure for how you create a story? For example, do you start off with, a big inciting incident or major change and then, build your story from there?
So I usually don't. I sort of have to. It's part of the these are things that I probably should systematize more. I haven't. I kind of have to hear it, and I'll hear what they're going for. I go, okay, here's where I would approach that from. I'm currently working with a client who's a coaching client. We're looking at sort of examples of their coaching success, and they've given me all this mess of information. And in that, of how they want to words with this client and such, but they want to form a case study out of these building blocks. And I'm looking at this going, okay, I actually could hear an oral history. I could hear an oral history of, hey, let's talk from the client's perspective, the coach's perspective, how did coaching help, et cetera, and really kind of find that way. But it's not the same thing every time. There are tricks to things that I do, tricks of, how I break down paragraphs using subheadings, et cetera, using, devices and such. So there's some standard issue, but there's not really a set format. Things do change every time. I'm mindful of the clock. I don't want to keep anybody past 10. So.
And with that, Shaun, I'm going to remind everybody that they have your contact details. So if they want to talk further specifically about their business, it's a great opportunity to reach out and speak more with Shaun. But Shaun, I'll ask you to say the final words. Is there something you like to leave us with? Keep telling your stories. Your stories are fascinating. They are really unique. They are interesting no matter what you believe or who has told you otherwise. Don't listen to them. They're what sets you apart, and people do want to hear. So I always want to hear you. Want to ever chat? Feel free to reach out anytime.